Good evening, everyone. Thank you for having me here. I'm excited to be here. I'm going to make an assumption that most of you who is here in the audience probably doesn't know very much about accessibility, or at least I'm hoping that's the case. Two quick caveats before I get started. One is that if you joined myself earlier this afternoon to hear me talk, some of this will be a bit of a reprise, or if you caught Christopher Patno. I'm also here wearing my hat as co-chair of the Global Accessibility Awareness Day Foundation, rather than LinkedIn proper. More on that a little later. But first, a couple of quick stories. So like most of you here, or probably all of you here, I depend on my mobile banking. So back in late November, I was ready to do some transactions, the usual, pay some bills. Launched my iPhone. Now, just to give a little context, I'm completely blind, so I use software that reads back to me what's on the screen as I'm dragging my finger across my phone. And if you want a demo of that, come see me after. So I use my mobile banking app all the time. So it came that I switched it on, went onto the mobile app, got set, found where I entered my username and password. And when I started typing in my username, it wasn't going through. And I was like, OK, well, this is weird. I knew the keyboard was there because I could type numbers, but it wasn't registering. And so the little submit button I wouldn't be able to submit. So long story short, I was, at that moment, blocked from doing any banking. Now, just imagine if you were in that situation. Now, I had a couple of choices. I could, if I wanted to, ask a friend, maybe, but then that would mean I would have to give up my privacy and hand over my username or password. That wasn't going to work. So I'll fast forward through that story to say I did confirm with some other folks who are blind that they were having similar problems with the same banking application. So somewhere down the line, something broke between the week before or the day before and now. Another story. I travel a lot. First time here in Saudi Arabia, but I do travel a lot back in America. Last year, even though there was the pandemic, I think I averaged about 150 nights in hotel rooms. So I'm fairly comfortable navigating around and such. Well, I was visiting Seattle and checked into a large business class hotel and was getting assistance to my room. Very, very typical. Walked over to the elevator with a bellman. We walked in, and I casually asked what I usually do, which is, can you just show me where the button is for my floor? Long story short, this was a touch-screen elevator with those inlaid buttons, so no physical buttons. Visually, they were there, but for me, I couldn't find where they were. It was just a totally flat screen. And so I was talking to the gentleman, and of course, he was totally like, what is he going to do? He's a bellman guiding this blind person who's probably never interacted with a blind person before. And what he said to me was, well, if you need help, you could just call downstairs, and we'll come and get you. Now, as I said, I travel fairly frequently, and the ability to kind of get from my room to the front door is kind of important from a number of reasons, not the least of which is safety. Now, when the hotel decided to implement that touch screen, of course, probably they didn't think of guests like myself who were completely blind. Anyway, the moral of that story was I checked out the next day, and that hotel didn't get my business. Now, so those are two stories. I tell them because they're illustrative of what happens when accessibility is not intentionally thought of. In the first case, like I said, likely what ended up happening was because that app used to work before, someone was in a rush and they didn't do testing that they had typically done before. So in that case, like I said, I was in this situation where I would have to relinquish my privacy in order to do banking. Now, a week later, I won't get into the story here, but a week later, that thing got fixed. In terms of the elevator situation, again, like I said before, it probably looked really cool, technology, right? To have this touch screen, but then they didn't think of the full range of their guests, including guests like myself who can't see. So what is this thing called accessibility? Let's just step back for a minute. To be clear, accessibility is all about making whatever technology, whether it's web, mobile apps, or whatever else any of you are thinking up now, all that latest new technology, XR, AR, all of that stuff, it's making that usable by everyone, including those of us who may happen to have a disability or impairment. Now, this whole concept might be new to all of you, or many of you, but in reality, accessibility has been around for a while. The World Wide Web Consortium published their first set of guidelines on accessibility back in 1999. And the latest version, 2.1 of the Web Content Accessibility Guidelines, came out in 2018. So all that stuff has been around for a bit of time. And again, it's a different presentation that maybe one day I can do here, but what are these Web Content Accessibility Guidelines? They're design and engineering principles and best practices that guide the technical folks in the room on how to make those interfaces and those experiences usable and accessible. So, we've talked about what happens when accessibility isn't thought of from the beginning, and I told you a little bit about what accessibility is at a very high level. But let's get to it. I've got only a few minutes left, and I know that we're running a little late. So let's talk about how do you join this digital accessibility revolution? And how do you get involved in making sure that all of this new technology doesn't exclude over 1 billion of us who have a disability or impairment? Well, the very first thing is you're here, you're listening. You decided to stay. You didn't go grab a drink or do anything like that. So there's your first step. But the most important thing is getting to learn more about what accessibility is, and more specifically, how do those of us with different disabilities or impairments use technology? I get the fact that most of you in this room probably have never thought of the fact that someone like myself might want to use your website, your mobile app, or other technology. Or that there might be people, for example, who don't have use of their hands, and they might be using voice recognition software. So the first thing I would say is get out there. There's so many resources out there now. Use your favorite search engine. Find that out. Reach out to me directly. I can connect you with resources. So that's one thing. Another thing that you need to do is start adding accessibility as a core user requirement alongside privacy and security. So important. And one of the other things to think about if you want to join this digital accessibility revolution is include those of us with disabilities as part of your design and development phases. And you might be saying, well, how do I find people with disabilities to test my stuff out? Again, reach out to me. That's part of the reason I'm here and excited to be here. You see my name on the slide. Reach out to me on LinkedIn. You can find me on Twitter at Jennison. My point here that I wanted to do was just open that conversation with all of you and let you know that, yes, There are people different than you who want to access the technology. And sure, the primary audience, like I said, are people with disabilities. But disability is one of those interesting constructs. There are people, for example, who have temporary disabilities. You break your arm, so you might end up using voice recognition software for a short period of time. There might be a situational disability. How many of you have been in a loud room and you want to catch a video and you're starting to use the closed captioning? That's also accessibility. So as you build for accessibility, you're also helping yourselves. So in closing, let me say this. By all of you deciding to intentionally join this accessibility revolution, and by making your technologies more inclusive, it's not all about just doing the right thing and all of that kind of stuff. You're making sure that all of us, the more than 1 billion of us who happen to have a disability or impairment, or we're people of determination, which I understand is the phrase used here in the Middle East, you're making sure that we also have this opportunity that everyone else does to benefit from technology from the perspective of thriving in society, finding employment, and being creators and co-creators of the technology, and being able to take advantage of all of that technology, all of the opportunities that are out there. Thank you so much for your attention.